As Endwalker is fast approaching, Square Enix has been remarkably tight-lipped about the details of the expansion's plot, besides that it's the coming of the final days once more. We know that we're going to Old Sharlayan, a locale that has been very prevalent in the lore of Final Fantasy XIV, though not front and center until recently. And Old Sharlayan is as shrouded in mystery as the rest of the expansion. They seem to have some secret knowledge of the final days and what it may entail, and keep this Aetherite in mind, it's going to be important later. So what secrets are Old Sharlayan hiding? What is it that they are desperately trying to squirrel away from the rest of the world? Well, to answer that, we have to go to another world. The first, specifically. Hey boyos, Thaladin here, and I got some lore to drop on you. When I was doing research to make a video on Amaurot and the Convocation of the 14 and their relation to Greek culture, because they obviously are, among other things, I stumbled upon something very, very interesting. In the depths of the Tempest, there is the city of Amaurot, recreated by Emet-Selch's strong creative magics and powerful desire to see his home once more. In Amaurot, you can talk to phantom Amaurotines and explore a little portion of the city, but you also get in Shadowbringers access to 2 dungeons that are related to this ancient culture, one of which is the Anemone Anadir. The other is the Academia Anadir, which is a learning institution of Amaurot, where they would go to practice their powerful creative magics. And it's there that we learn a little bit about the Convocation of the 14, specifically Mitron, Halmarut, and, most notably, La Habrea, the speaker for the entire Convocation, and a very prominent figure in Amaurotine society, as he was very well renowned for creating interesting and fantastical beasts with his creation magics. Throughout the dungeon, you get little text pieces that sort of explain certain details about these Ashians. For example, Mitron is very associated with aquatic life, which is very interesting, given that we actually know Mitron's true name, but that is perhaps a subject for another video. We learned that Halmarut was associated with plants and creating life on land. And finally, La Habrea really specialized in creating these phantom creatures, and we know that he is responsible for the existence of both Phoenix, quite intentionally, and Ifrit, quite unintentionally. Ifrit's what's happened when Azim decides to mix a volcano with a giant fire monster. Look, that's again, another video. I specifically wanted to examine La Habrea's section of the dungeon. I've been trying to figure out what the true names of all the Ashians are. With La Habrea being aspected to fire, it seems, I had this thought that maybe he was Hephaestus, the forge of the Greek gods, since we now know that the Ashians are named after Greek deities. This was coincidental when we first found out the true name of Emet-Selch, Hades, and was further confirmed by finding out that Logrith's name was Gaia, and Mitron's name was Artemis. I found inside the words of La Habrea several artifacts. Some were creatures, some were items, so this idea of Hephaestus was very powerful in my mind, but then I came across a singular, important detail that would crack open the entire case of Amaurot and Old Sharlayan. At the end of the dungeon, after defeating the final boss, you're in a sort of patio with some creations of La Habrea, and front and center in this forum of creation and knowledge gathering and the arts is this symbol. Does it look familiar? Well, how about now? And how about now? You see, this symbol found in the depths of the Academia is eerily similar to both the Aetherite that is in Old Sharlayan, which is actually an Aetherite carved in the image of the flag of Old Sharlayan. And it was at this point that everything clicked into place. While Old Sharlayan might be called Old Sharlayan, we should really be calling it New Amaurot. Let's look at some of the evidences. Much of this is going to be speculation, but I think a lot of it is too coincidental to ignore going into Endwalker, particularly given the care and the love that the writing team has put into the game in the past, and that has come back to us in the form of ARR plotlines being resolved in Shadowbringers and all kinds of things. So I'm really excited. Let's go. The big elephant in the room is the fact that this symbol, which is really put first and foremost in the forum of the Academia, is very obviously connected to the primary symbol of Old Sharlayan. If you look at the Aetherite, the way that it moves and configures, it's very possible that even some of the minor discrepancies could, in theory, be aligned with the different way that it floats. You can even see here that the primary metalworking on the inner crystal, if you just flip it around, it should match up quite perfectly to the shell that is presented here. In the Encyclopedia Eorzea, we get a description of the flag, which has this shell icon. It says, when Thaliok, who is a member of the 12 that is the patron deity of Old Sharlayan, poured the waters of knowledge into his river, the spiral shell became their keeper. Such is the legend wherein the Nautilus came to symbolize wisdom. In addition, men have believed that the mollusks live forever from time immemorial. Sound familiar? It is to capture the essence of these meanings that Sharlayan's flag bears a green spiral shell emblazoned upon a field of silver. This is huge. If you think about the fact that it is a shell, you can begin to unravel a myriad of mysteries. For one, we don't know if the ruins of Old Amaurot exist on the source. I think a lot of people have assumed that they don't exist anymore due to the number of calamities, but maybe that is not the case. Sharlayan was founded when a bunch of Eorzeans, following the Great Flood of the Sixth Umbral Calamity, decided to sail off and make their own country. I think it was a Rogadan named, let me find the name. Neonkrep Neomkrepsen. What a Chad name. I love it. Oh, it's so good. What a great name. Rose have the best names. Neonkrep was originally from an island called Ersland, and he predicted that the flood would be striking Eorzea. This would be known as the Great Flood from the War of the Magi, the Sixth Umbral Calamity. So he sailed down, tried to get a bunch of Eorzeans to Noah's Ark with him, and when it happened, he said, well, okay, we're good. And then they went off and they traveled north across the ocean to found Sharlayan. Because of all this nautical talk, it makes sense that the shell would be a very important symbol of knowledge. But the shell also, I think, represents, one, the symbol that they found, and two, the source of wisdom being a city beneath the waves. Whether that be Amaurot that they found while they sailed, or an Amaurot that was shown to them, perhaps by a member of the Ashians. Before diving into maybe some further thoughts about the connection between Amaurot and Sharlayan on a historical level, let's just look at their similarities. These two cultures are so similar, it is eerie when you take a step back and realize how obvious it has been ever since Shadowbringers released. Both cultures are heavily inspired by Greek Athens. All of the major zones and regions and peoples in this game have kind of real-life equivalents or real-life analogs. For example, Garlemald is very clearly the Roman Empire. Hingashi is very Japanese. The Azam Steppe is Mongolian in nature. And Ishgard is similar to medieval Europe, quite specifically France. The Final Fantasy XIV team does not shy away from embracing real-life analogs to draw these cultures on. In fact, they seem to really heavily lean into them. Amaurot was obsessed with rhetoric, education, and the arts, which are all three major pillars of Greek culture. They even had a democratic system, which eventually evolved into a democratic system with a council to handle the day-to-day routines, which is quite specifically Greek. The Ecclesia was the assembly of all voting men in Athens. Any man who was eligible to vote, so not a slave, not a foreigner, could participate there. But they eventually adopted this concept of a boule, or a council of 500. This council would take care of a lot of the nitty-gritty, like administrative decisions. They would meet every day, and they were leaders in the community. not unsimilar to the Convocation of the 14 in Amaurot. An important distinction is that the Boule was selected by lot rather than elected, whereas the Convocation is elected, but I think you can see the analogs here between their tiers of governance. Amaurot loved to create new knowledge, and they saw it as the responsibility and the privilege of each of the Amaurotines to create new things with their creation magics and then share that knowledge with the community. And they would often engage in rhetoric about how to best use this knowledge for the world at large. Sharlayan seems to have an opinion of hoarding that knowledge, but they're no less obsessed with gathering education in the etheric arts and in the industrial arts as well. They use a lot of ethereal technology, and they publish a lot of books. A lot of books. Have you seen Google Library? These two cultural values of gathering information and education is something that's shared between Sharlayan and Amaurot quite distinctly. But the similarities run a little bit deeper. Oh, did I mention that the head of the forum is called the Speaker of the Forum, much like how La Habrea is called the Speaker of the Convocation? That could be attributed to just having similar names for things, but I think it's an important little detail. The Sharlayans also have a preoccupation with the idea of equality amongst their members. It's why they don't release population statistics for the diversity of races. They want everybody to be on equal footing. This is something that's spoken about in Amaurot in the side quest, this idea of the equality of the people being actually more important than individualistic expression, which is just a very important detail. Very, very neat similarities between these two cultures, which might be considered coincidental if it wasn't for their symbol literally being present in both. But speaking of their symbol, let's look at their Aetherites once more, both that of Amaurot and that of Sharlayan. Aetherites are an interesting thing in Final Fantasy XIV. For the most part, I think we just click on them and we move along with our lives. But if you take some time to pay attention, you'll notice that the Aetherites have cultural regional distinctions. An Aetherite in Authored is going to look very different from an Aetherite in Thanalan, even though Authored Aetherites will look similar, and Thanalan Aetherites will also look similar to each other. The design of each of the Aetherite crystals is an artistic and cultural representation of the people that live there. That is very important, because if you look at Old Sharlayan's Aetherite in the main city, it has this very fine metalworking and intricate designs. And there is only one other place in the game that seems to share this design philosophy for its Aetherite. That is Amaurot! Look over here at the Aetherite in Amaurot. It has very fine metalworking. It has very similar shading of metal even, despite the fact that it's underwater. And it seems to be very unique in the way it's designed, or at least it was until the Endwalker trailer dropped. Considering that these Aetherites are built on cultural differences, or even geographical differences, which you could argue that the two are very interrelated, this would imply that there is a cultural or geographical link between Old Sharlayan and Amaurot based on how the rest of the game's logic operates. So despite the fact that the Aetherites are extremely similar, despite the fact that the Convocation of the 14 versus the Forum of Sharlayan is extremely similar, what else could be related? Well, let's take a look at the Bibliotheca Historica, the thing that the Sharlayans keep adding the history of the world to. That is literally a Greek book. It was literally a Greek book. They are so Greek it blows my mind. Now, one can make an argument that Amaurot is a mixture of Greek society and also the Utopian society that is depicted in Utopia by Thomas More, and those are both extremely accurate. I think the leanings on Utopia by Thomas More, which was kind of a socio-political critique / satire, is extremely prevalent in Amaurot, but Amaurot is also just very obviously distinctly Greek. Thought I'd call it out there. Extremely interesting, the similarities between Thomas More's book and our favorite ancient city. Oh wait, you remember how I mentioned Google earlier? There is one other small, tiny distinction that I need to make. Have you noticed the kind of music that I've been playing for this entire video? Kind of like this smooth jazz. Well, some of you might recognize it from Grey Google Library. Or the Andir. Or the Academia. Because those are the 3 locales in the game that utilize smooth jazz. The only 3 to my knowledge. If you can think of any others, please let me know in the comments down below. Because looking at it, I realized that Old Sharlayan and Amaurot, those locations, things that are associated with the collection of knowledge of both of those cultures, use the same type of music, creating a further thematic link between the 2. Now, that was mind-blowing when I realized this. Great Google Hard, and Academia and Anemone. As a disclaimer, St. Motion's Arboretum is also a Sharlayan location in New Sharlayan. It is not, however, a place of traditional learning. It's more of an arboretum for flora and fauna, and I think that I think that's worth calling out. I don't think it detracts from the coincidence of smooth jazz. If you also look at the belief systems of Old Sharlayan and the Amaurotines, they're both very anti-war. They're very collaborative. They believe that all conflict can be resolved by discussion. It's actually very interesting to look at Old Sharlayan's policy of non-intervention and then see that exact same discussion mirrored in discussions between Amaurotines and Amaurot, talking about whether they should aid a city-state across the pond. I was looking at the Encyclopedia Orzi and I just realized they literally call the common people, the Ecclesia, super Greek-wise. I didn't realize that was actually the name for them in game. Oh my god, it's so clear. Alright, this is all coincidental evidence to convince you that, hey, Sharlayan is kind of similar to Amaurot. So similar that it's impossible to ignore. They have similar belief systems, similar opinions about how knowledge should be gathered, although it is very distinct that their opinion about how it should be disseminated varies wildly. They have similar structures for their Aetherites. They have a similar cultural base in the real-life equivalent, the Greek. And they're positioned pretty uniquely that if there are ruins of Amaurot around, they're closer to them than the rest of the world, depending on if they're in the Indigo Deep or if they're a little bit closer to Old Sharlayan. What does this mean? It means one of 2 things. Old Sharlayan either stumbled upon the old ruins of Amaurot and derived a bunch of knowledge from there, learning about the end days, learning about ethereal manipulation, the way that they can shoot forward in their technology, all kinds of things, and that's how they were built up so quickly. Or they were given this knowledge. If they were given this knowledge, this is pure speculation, but I believe it would be La Habrea, the speaker for the Convocation of the 14. Or also, as I would call him, Prometheus. Whereas Emmett Selk was busy setting up empires to help push the Ascian agenda, La Habrea has a history of being sent somewhat as an emissary to powerful countries throughout all of Hydaelyn. We see this with him speaking into the ear of Gaius and giving him the Ultima Weapon. We see this when he advises Archbishop Thordan VII in Ishgard, hoping to share knowledge of the Ascians with him in return for his cooperation, passing on the forbidden fire of knowledge. And much like Prometheus, he incurred the wrath of a god king. Except for Prometheus got, chained up and tortured, and La Habrea just kind of got ate by a sword. I'm not proposing one-to-one parallels between La Habrea and Prometheus. Clearly that is not going to be the case, but I do think that there are thematic similarities here. Prometheus was considered the father of human arts and sciences, and La Habrea was a very prominent figure in Amaurot society on both of these fronts. He's also aspected to fire, though whether or not their elemental aspects play that much of a role into their office, it has yet to be seen. You see some weirdness between Metron and Artemis and how their responsibilities line up. But whether it was La Habrea or not, I think that it is very interesting that they Old Sharlayans are so confident in their knowledge of the end days. If they were, say, advised by an Ascian about the way the world was pre-sundering, and the way that they hope the world will be once more whole, why would they intervene with the various calamities? The only time Sharlayan cared about Garlemald advancing was when it was going to take out their settlement. If the Ascians spoke into the ears of Old Sharlayan and said, "Do not intervene, the world will be a better place. Hoard your knowledge for the days to come," I don't see a reason why they wouldn't do that. And it's important to note that this restriction on knowledge is really a huge result of the Bibliotheca faction, which is my understanding, which is the faction led by Daddy Levieur. Family issues. This would explain their confidence with knowing the signs of the end days. They would have direct accounts of how it were to begin from the Ascians, the ancients, who were there. It would also mean that Old Sharlayan is, as it appears to be, a direct recreation of Amaurotine society. Literally, Old Sharlayan is New Amaurot, and it was designed that way from, it seems, pretty early on in its conception. It might not even be unfeasible to think that Narumfrumkon, the Roganin who guided the peoples of Eorzea north, might have been an Ascian in disguise, seeking to set up a bunker where the Amaurotine way of life, no matter what happens, can be preserved. If you remember in the trailer, Daddy Levieur says this line.
So, Sharlayan would keep its counsel while the world is lost to ruin?
It would. Come what may, we shall live on. We must.
Now, this is an interesting line because the English localization does not match the Japanese translation, nor I think the French and the German. Whereas the English localizes to "come what may, we will survive." Other languages have a more literal translation, something more similar to "no matter the fate of this star." That implies not a sort of stoic "what will be," but a direct knowledge of the fate of Hydaelyn and a preparation for what is to come. That leads me to think that Old Sharlayan is a bunker for ancient knowledge. We see Labyrinthos down below, or at least it looks like it's below, some sort of preservation area with creepy-ass music. And it's possible that even should the source burn, the Sharlayans have a plan to survive, so that no matter what, Amaurotine culture is not lost. For example, let's say there was a shard, say the 13th, that was ruined because Logrif fucked it up. And then it was then rejoined to the source, destroying most of inhabitable life. Having a bunker of people that were loyal to the Ascian way, or at least maybe some of their leadership was, and was willing to manipulate the people, would be extremely useful. It would be a great backup plan. And if nothing else, should all the unsundered and sundered Ascians pass away, be killed by aspiring warriors of light, then at the very least, the spirit of Amaurot does not die. Emet-Selch built empires to try to bring back the Amaurot that was in body. And I believe that while Emet-Selch built the physical body of Amaurot in the Tempest, La Habrea, or perhaps a different Ascian, but really I feel like it's La Habrea, wanted to instill the spirit of Amaurot in a new city-state. That, and I don't really think it's much of a coincidence that the 8-man raid is Pandemonium and is featuring La Habrea's mask. But what do you guys think? What do you guys think of the theory? Is Old Sharlayan related to Amaurot? Is this off base? Is it all coincidence? Let me know what you think down in the comments, and I'll see you for the next video about Final Fantasy XIV. Maybe I'll dive more into how Amaurot was a mirror of Greek society and also Utopia from Thomas More's book. That might be fun. Until next time, guys. Bye!